Welcome to session 9. Today we're going to be thinking about some of the change makers from the American Revolution. And in order to really dive deep into how we can call someone a change maker, we really need to think about what is a change maker first. So let's take some time right now and think about what are some of the core values that a change maker possesses, right? So if we think about that person, what type of traits do they have? And we do this often in our reading, right? We think about a character trait when we think about what a character says, does, acts, and how they act, that is, and we analyze their traits. That's very similar to people in real life. So when we think about a change maker, someone who promotes change, positive change, right? Usually they are someone who is very curious, right, about the world around them. They're committed to their cause, whatever it may be. They are collaborative, so they work well with others. They're a risk taker, right? They want to make sure they make this, whatever their cause is, happen. And so they sometimes have to be a risk taker in order to accomplish that. They're reflective during their process, right? Thinking about what worked, what didn't work. And that sort of goes hand in hand, that is, with being a problem solver. They're also very caring, right? And that's one of the main reasons they want to see change, right? They want something better for those that they notice that aren't being treated well. And last, they're resilient. So another way to think about that word is they're persistent. They don't give up. So now that we're thinking a little more deeply about what a change maker is, we have these traits in mind. Let's think about some of the people we've heard a little bit about so far in social studies in this unit about the road to the American Revolution. And how might some of them embody some of these traits? I'm going to model this with Benjamin Franklin. Let me scroll on down to here. I'm going to read an article on Benjamin Franklin and a little bit of a biography of him, but we've heard his name throughout some of these different events that have led up to the American Revolutionary War. And as I read this biography, I want to be thinking about those traits I just mentioned. In order for us to all be on the same page, I went ahead and made this document for us. So it's in your own paper journal, right near this think sheet. So a change maker traits think sheet. So based on the words that you see in the green on this page right here, you'll choose 1 or 4 of them, and let's find some evidence in the articles that prove that that person is either a problem solver, resilient, or a risk taker. So you would write down the trait here, and then you'll write the evidence that you find in the article in here that relates to that trait. Then we can think about a different trait and new evidence, or if it's the same trait, maybe we rewrite the same word here as well. But you'll have an opportunity to do this with a different person. I just want to model it with Benjamin Franklin. So I'm going to keep these words in mind: problem solver, reflective, committed, caring, resilient, curious, collaborative, and a risk taker. When do I notice any of these pieces in the article describing Benjamin Franklin? When is it like that trait and I can use that sentence? Benjamin Franklin, the ultimate solution creator. Benjamin Franklin is credited with an array of inventions and accomplishments. Among these are the repeal of Britain's Stamp Act, bifocals, the lightning rod, the Franklin stove, the reform and creation of the original U.S. postal system. All are notable for being solutions in the 1700s to everyday problems faced by Franklin's peers or to bigger social and political issues like the American colonies' lack of representation during Britain's rule. When faced with some kind of roadblock or trouble, Franklin was particularly adept at finding a way around it. That kind of sounds like one of the traits we learned about. It says, when faced with some kind of roadblock or trouble, Franklin was particularly adept at finding a way around it. Sounds like he's a problem solver here. What I could do is go, I think it's up, go up here and start writing that down. I'm going to keep reading just to make sure. And notice what I've done here is I've highlighted the evidence, but then used the pen, I'm using my Apple pen or crayon that is, to note down the trait. But for you, if while you're reading it, you're like, that sounds like something, scroll up to this page in green and think to yourself, which of these might describe that moment? I think problem solver best describes it. So I'm going to leave it at that and continue on. Beyond his keen intuition that facilitated his discoveries and solutions, Franklin had an exceptional intelligence. This was evident in the way he approached problems. The man was famous for being economical, community-driven, and supportive of education and hard work. Besides dual-purpose eyeglasses and a less smoky fireplace, Franklin is also credited with inventing the lightning rod. This is perhaps his most famous invention, and with good reason. Before it, lightning striking one's home could have disastrous consequences, especially since houses were generally made of wood. The invention came about as a way for Franklin to test a hypothesis. He believed that lightning was related to electricity, a common piece of knowledge now, but it was new in 1750 when he invented the lightning rod. By understanding that lightning tended to hit the highest, nearest point, Franklin determined that putting a rod at the top of a building meant lightning would more likely hit the rod than the house itself. Franklin's lightning rod connected to a wire that ran down through the house and into the ground, where it was attached to a ground rod. Both rods were made of metal, which Franklin theorized would conduct the electricity of the lightning. By moving from the first rod down the length of the wire, the lightning's energy could be safely transmitted to the ground, where it would no longer pose a threat to one's home or body. So when I look at that section all about the lightning rod, this makes me think of him as a bit of a risk taker, because he is putting his life at risk if we're thinking about testing out where lightning is going to hit. I could maybe even say that he's curious, right? Because he's trying these things out. And that's the nice thing about this activity. There's more than one answer as long as you can justify it. So I would use this text evidence here. So I would say this would be an example of him either being a risk taker. The invention came about as a way for Franklin to test a new hypothesis. So this is him showing that he is curious. In an unusual move, Franklin never patented a single one of his designs or inventions, which meant other people were free to copy them, to improve upon them, or recreate them. He resisted hoarding his ideas because he truly believed that people benefited from one another's inventions. It gave society an advantage if new designs and inventions were available to all, because that way more minds could work on them in order to make them better. By coming up with devices and systems that addressed certain problems, but refraining from trademarking his inventions, Franklin paved the way for others to continually improve his initial solutions. So when I look back over these green words, and I think about Benjamin Franklin, that last part really stands out to talk to him being very collaborative, right? He didn't mind if other people were going to work and improve his own inventions. So if I were to pull up one last thing, he resisted hoarding his ideas because he truly believed that people benefited from one another's inventions. So as I look back over what we noted in this, and again, that you may have found other pieces of text evidence and aligned it to a different one of the words. These are just the ones I chose. So I have collaborative, curious, risk taker, curious again, and problem solver. So what I would do now is take those words and jot them up in here. So problem solver. And then next we had curious. We also had risk taker. And last we had collaborative. All right, before I move on, I want to make sure I note his name. So right here under name, And his era, we would say, is the colonial era. Right? Or you could even say the American Revolution era. Then what I would do is I would take those sentences from the text and put them inside the yellow Post-it. So for problem solver, it said, when faced with some kind of roadblock or trouble, Franklin was particularly adept at finding a way around it. So I was careful to put quotes around this sentence because it came from the text. The invention came about as a way for Franklin to test his hypothesis. Okay, and the next was when he was a risk taker. Right here, by moving the first rod down the length of the wire. You know what, instead of putting this entire sentence, I am going to summarize and say it was when he invented his lightning rod. And now the last piece is when he was collaborative. I remember that being at the very end. So it says he resisted hoarding his ideas. So as we look back at what we were able to pull away from the biography on Benjamin Franklin, we can now prove that he was a problem solver, he was curious, he was a risk taker, and very collaborative. And that's what would make him, in our opinion, a change maker, right? So he used all of these qualities to support not only his inventions, but helping to support the American Revolution. As I mentioned earlier, in the digital notebook, you will now be choosing which person or group of people you want to focus on for today's lesson. And you're going to choose and click on the link to just that one person or that group of people and read that article. But remember that the real notes that you're going to share with your teacher should be on that think sheet that looks exactly like the one we filled out. So once again, if you haven't grabbed your paper journal, do so now and find this sheet and a pencil or a pen. You're going to have this out and take notes on when you find one of either the group of people or the person you choose being these different qualities. Okay. All right, off you go.